Welcome everyone to the first webinar of the year from the Carpenter Law Firm. We confront today the possibility that there is a mythical creature in Arizona, the 1 hour board meeting or the 1 hour membership meeting, the 1 hour annual meeting. I've been thinking about this for a long time, for many years. I've been to a lot of board meetings. I've been to a lot of open board meetings waiting for the executive session, and I don't sit critically. I sit in observation of meeting protocols and how meetings are conducted. And I thought I would present today an overview of kind of what does the law require? What are we doing with meetings in Arizona's community associations from the standpoint of which components of these meetings does Arizona law require? And what are we doing, we, the community association, industrial complex at large, that the law does not require? What are we doing to ourselves that make these meetings last longer than necessary? And I thought I would give you the overview of what the statutes require, what the law requires, and then point out as an observer what we're doing to make the meetings last longer. And you can keep doing them. You can keep doing these things if you want to, for many good reasons. Engagement with owners, engagement with residents, community building, things that help keep tempers down, any number of good things that come from meetings that create engagement. Engagement is an incredible concept that we need to take very seriously, and I do take seriously. But that's the goal today, is to, as a lawyer, outline what does the law require and which pieces are optional. Keep doing the optional things for reasons that are important to you and your communities. All right, so we'll start with board meetings. Board meetings under Arizona law do have mandatory components. So from the statutory scheme, the statute says, and we know this, any person, doesn't say owner, any person designated by a member, here member means owner, any person designated by an owner in writing as the person's representative, and all members or designated representatives so desiring shall be allowed to attend and speak at an appropriate time during the deliberations and proceedings. Now, it turns out that the statute does not differentiate between board meetings and membership meetings. Now, when we think about the membership meeting, we only think about the annual meeting, but of course, as you know, we could have a membership meeting between annual meetings. We could call a membership meeting to consider a CC&R amendment. We could call a membership meeting to consider a special assessment or to vote on something else. But for our purposes, we're going to think of the membership meeting as the annual meeting, just to keep things simple. So the statute says any person designated by a member in writing, it could be the owner's lawyer, it could be the owner's tenant, it could be the owner's advocate, it could be someone who says, I dislike HOAs and I'm a member of an advocacy group and I think this association stinks to high heaven and I'm here to take you on. And I want to speak because I think this association is the epicenter of homeowner abuse. That's happened before. So here's my written designation. Now, what I've seen over the years is it's actually in the association's interest to decline to be very judgmental about the writing. If the writing is sloppy, written on a sock, inarticulate, let's just let them speak. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? Uh, any person designated by the member in writing as their representative can speak at an appropriate time. So this adds time to the meeting. That's the theme today. What makes meetings longer than an hour? This is one of the mandatory components. Any person is allowed to attend and speak at an appropriate time. Now, one of the things we've debated in the community association industry, the industrial complex, you want to call it that, if I want to call it that, which I've now done twice, joke's over, is what is an appropriate time during the deliberations and proceedings? We'll come back to this later. Does that mean that we can front load the opportunity to attend and speak and say everybody speaks at the beginning, or can we say everybody speaks at the end, or not? Well, we did that for a while, then the statute changed, and as you probably know, now everybody gets to talk after the board discusses an agenda item, but before action is taken. So this particular component of homeowner comment existed for a while, and then the legislature said, no, homeowners get to speak throughout the board meeting on the agenda items themselves. And so the few years we had just this number one component on the screen here, we were able to say, well, you can speak during homeowner comment. So number two, or 1A or 1.1 here, is the board can place reasonable time restrictions on the people speaking during the meeting, but you have to allow the member or their representative to speak once after the board has discussed a specific agenda item and before the board takes formal action on that item in addition to any other opportunities to speak. That doesn't say you have to have other opportunities to speak. It's almost as if saying, in addition to any other opportunities to speak, if any. So the challenge here is that the legislature has turned the board meeting into a membership comment free-for-all. And some board chairs are good at handling this, and some find it more challenging. That's not a judgment. I've seen it. Some board chairs are very good at, all right, hey board, there's a motion to accept the landscaping bid from ABC Landscaping. I made that up. Is there board discussion? Yes. Okay. All board discussion is done. All right. Anybody in the audience? And we're going to take a reasonable amount of members speaking. 1 minute, that's a reasonable time restriction, or 2 minutes per homeowner. And then once the homeowner comment is finished, then the board votes. There's a way to do this in an organized fashion under the statute. So we're not perfect with this, but the board chair should be good at it. We hope the board chair is good at it to make this an orderly thing to do. But obviously, this could make the board meetings longer. And again, we're talking about the mythology of a 1 hour board meeting. This homeowner discussion of board meeting agenda topics is what makes board meetings longer. And one of the challenges is that under a separate statute, which we're not discussing today, homeowners are entitled to a copy of the agenda. But the statute does not say that the homeowners are entitled to a copy of the 3 landscape bids that the board is considering. So the homeowners stand up and make a comment about what the board has discussed, but the homeowners do not have the entire board packet. The homeowners don't have all three bids. The homeowners are not making the decision about which landscape company to hire, ABC, DEF, or GHI landscapers. That's three bids, ABC, DEF, or GHI, one of the three companies. The homeowner doesn't have the three bids because the homeowner's not entitled to the three bids. The homeowner's not entitled to a copy of the board packet. The homeowner receives a copy of the board agenda upon entry, or on the website, or whatever manner you're using to provide the homeowner, the member, the designated person, a copy of the agenda. So the homeowner's comment is based entirely on the board's discussion. So that takes time in the meeting. Okay, so this is a mandatory component of what has to happen at the board meeting. There's a second part. The board must provide for a reasonable number of people to speak on each side of an issue. So if the issue is hire ABC landscaping or not, the board chair is supposed to, under the statute, say, okay, there's homeowners in favor of ABC. The board must provide for a reasonable number of people to speak against ABC. But my experience is there may be nobody in the audience who wants to speak against ABC landscaping. The legislature assumed back when they did this change to the statute that inevitably there would be somebody in the audience for and against each agenda item proposition, and that the board could organize the speakers in a way where the board must provide for a reasonable number of people, pro and con, on each agenda item. Now, as you all know, this is preposterous. It's ridiculous that the board would even know how people feel about every agenda item. It's not the way the world works. But you can appreciate, if you've ever been to the legislature or watched any committee testimony about a bill, or been to the city of Phoenix City Council, or any town or city in Arizona where people take the mic and speak to the council, that on any topic, that's how they see things. That's how politicians view citizen involvement. And so they simply create a parallel. They simply extrapolate and say, well, our experience is that when we sit at the raised tables and citizens come before us and we pass judgment on the things that they want from us, that must be the way HOA boards work. They have their citizenry that come before them. They should be able to pick and choose a pro and a con for each thing that happens. Because in government work, we tend to have people who speak pro and con for each thing. But obviously, that's not how it works in homeowners associations. There may be somebody who's for the roofing contract. There may be somebody who's against it, but not everybody wants to take the microphone. Not everybody wants to speak up. There are introverts among us. It's not always so simple. Fresca solves anything, by the way. So we have this mandatory component, speak during the meeting on each agenda item, for and against. The second mandatory component, which actually most associations have figured out, that the announcement of the nature of a closed session can be printed on the agenda. But initially, when the legislature created this requirement, again, they extrapolated, analogized, they paralleled it. They essentially said, well, when cities go into a closed session, executive session, closed session, however you want to say it or think of it, a city council will say, well, hey, we're in an open city council session. Hey, everybody who's here, we're going to go into executive session. So what the legislature did is they said, well, when an association goes into a closed session, they must only do it after an open session. And there has to be a crowd there because that's what we think. That's what we know from the way cities work. So we'll create a statute that says when a board of a community association goes into executive session, they should announce the statute number for the reason they're going into executive session. So that's another mandatory component of a board meeting. When you go into closed session, tell the folks who are there, hey, we're going into a closed session. Here's the statute number for receiving legal advice. ARS 10-1804 B1. Well, there's no statutory requirement that a closed session follow an open session. Hopefully you all know that. But in theory, this would be another mandatory component. It takes 2 seconds, doesn't make a meeting longer. But because the legislature, when they enacted it, conceptualized that this would happen verbally at an open session, I thought I would include it here. So it turns out that from a statutory standpoint, what's in the statutes, what's in the Condominium Act and the Planned Community Statutes, this is it. These are the only things that are required to occur in a community association board meeting in Arizona. In all the statutes, the legislature has burdened a board meeting with only this. These are the only mandatory components that make board meetings last more than 10 seconds. This is it. This is the only thing. These are the only things that make board meetings long. Okay. Now, we also know that board meetings in Arizona have what I call traditional components. So when I go to a board meeting, I'm observing a lot more than the previous PowerPoint slide. What am I observing? Well, I'm observing the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. I'm observing officer reports, committee reports, old business, new business, and I'm also observing a management report. No criticism. We could call the meeting to order and tackle new business and old business. I'm not saying you should do that, but from a legal standpoint, if you buy what I was selling on the previous slide, you don't have to buy it or not. It's a true statement of Arizona law. We could look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and say, well, from a legal standpoint, we could get away with number 4 and number 5. So let's talk about the minutes. Why are we approving the minutes? We know that legally, minutes are supposed to be a record of action taken as recorded by the corporation. The minutes could be complete as recorded. And the idea that they should be approved at the next meeting by the full board is a constructed idea. And what has ended up happening is that a lot of associations operate on a kind of quasi made up sort of Robert's Rules of Order. And there's really nothing wrong with it. We've been doing it this way for decades. I've been at it since 1994. I'm proud of that. Been doing this a long time. But when you dig down deep and look at your governing documents, go through your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, your CC&Rs, and if you were to do a search term and search for Robert's Rules of Order and look for approval of minutes, you wouldn't find it in nearly all cases. And so we've created what you could loosely call the corporate custom of approving the minutes based on no legal requirement to follow Robert's Rules of Order and a very loose, almost made up idea that we've got this falsely created, made up corporate custom of kind of Robert's Rules of Order where somebody records action taken, but sometimes records a lot more than that. Sally said, Bob said the next thing, Ted made a motion, Marge seconded it, there was discussion, and then the following people said the following, and then there was a call to vote, and the vote was 6-1. It was, approved. Minutes can be a lot simpler than that. It's not the topic for today, but we end up with a situation where the approval of the minutes takes more time than it needs to sometimes because there's a lot of discussion. But the minutes are a record of action taken, and the minutes could be complete as recorded. The secretary, when he or she takes the minutes, could simply be done and complete as recorded. In addition, when we talk about number 2, officer reports and committee reports, those could be completed as written and as provided in the board packet if the goal is an efficient meeting. They do not need to be duplicated by verbal report, again, just by observation. There may be a dozen reasons why they should be presented verbally as well as provided in written form. Board members may not read the board packet. Board members may need the reports to be presented verbally, but again, it's the board meeting. So if the board members are not reviewing the board packet and the board members need it presented verbally, but if we think of it that way, that's fine. The board members don't read the board packet and need it presented verbally, that's one thing. But if the reports are being presented verbally for the members in attendance, then we should concede that we have turned the board meeting into a member forum. It's no longer a board meeting, and that's fine too. That's now a member engagement meeting. It's no longer a board meeting that the members are observing. It's a member engagement gathering, and that's perfectly fine. I have no beef with that at all. I'm presenting information today about what the law requires and suggesting reasons why our board meetings exceed an hour. And that's your choice. That's a board's choice to convert the board meeting into a member engagement forum. I have no criticism of that whatsoever. When the reports are written and presented verbally for the reason of member engagement, we just have to concede, that's fine, that the board meeting is a member engagement gathering. No problem. All right. Let's talk about the homeowner comment period of the board meeting. We could call this the talk about anything segment of the board meeting. There is no statutory requirement for this, although I did mention earlier that there's a portion of the statute that says the homeowners can comment during the meeting on an agenda item in addition to any other opportunities to speak. That's a reference to the homeowner comment. If you have homeowner comment at the beginning or at the end, the homeowner still has the right to speak on an agenda item. So if you give them this other opportunity to speak during the open forum, which I've called the homeowner comment period, talk about anything, they still have the right to speak on those agenda items. There is no statutory requirement to have an open comment, talk about anything, period. Not saying it's bad or should be discouraged. Sometimes associations find out about important things during the homeowner comment period. Sally comes to the mic during the homeowner comment and says, there's a tree in the common area that's dying and it needs to be removed. Well, that's an important thing to know. Sally comes to the association during the homeowner comment period and says, there's a sidewalk in the common area where the roots have raised one of the sections of concrete 1.5 inches. That's an important thing to know. Those are dangerous conditions. We may need the homeowner comment period so the association can learn about dangerous conditions. But these make meetings longer. Again, that may be good. There may be great reasons to have homeowner engagement. But the premise of my presentation today is what makes meetings long. And again, these may be good. We see these talk about anything periods in cities and towns. And again, maybe one of the reasons why we end up with them. All right, let's talk about membership meetings. This may look familiar, and it is exactly the same as what I said earlier about board meetings. It's exactly the same statutory requirement. The mandatory component of a membership meeting is exactly the same. A member can designate a representative to show up at the membership meeting. Exactly the same requirement to speak, attend and speak at an appropriate time during the deliberations and proceedings at an annual meeting. And the board can place reasonable time restrictions on a person speaking during the meeting on a specific agenda item. Now, I'm frustrated by this, not angry, just a little bit frustrated, because obviously the membership meeting is different than the board meeting. The membership meeting is the members' opportunity to have their own meeting once a year. Members can make motions from the floor. They elect directors. The president chairs the membership meeting. But it's the way the statute is written, by allowing the board to place reasonable time restrictions on people speaking at an annual meeting. It's a little awkward. You know, the language is awkward when you take these mandatory components and place these mandatory components in an annual meeting, excuse me, context. So it's awkward. I've been to a lot of annual meetings that lasted 20 minutes. You know, one of the things that's made annual meetings faster is the way the legislature has changed voting, the way we're doing absentee ballot voting, the process of voting and candidating for office has shifted away from the annual meeting. In the old days, you know, like I've been doing this for 50 years, but you know, in the old days, candidates would show up to the meeting, be nominated from the floor. They would make a speech at the meeting. The meetings were longer. But now we have an annual meeting essentially to announce the results that have happened by absentee ballot or electronic voting. And we end up with a situation where these mandatory components of the membership meeting, synonym annual meeting, don't end up being the reason that a membership meeting or an annual meeting takes a long time. And in fact, the reason that annual meetings should take longer is because we should be doing those reports, the president's report, the treasurer's report, the manager's report. The annual meeting really is a good opportunity for member engagement, where once a year we say, here's what we've done over the year. The president brags a bit about what he or she did. The treasurer can brag about the health and financial fitness of the association, and the manager can say, here are the great things we've done to manage the community, the common areas, the landscaping, and the efficiency that we've used to run the association. That's an opportunity at the annual meeting where I get a little frustrated for my clients, is when the legislature essentially tried to turn all 12 monthly board meetings into that annual gathering, by forcing every board meeting into a membership meeting. I don't think that was merited by the condition on the ground or the problems that were being created in board meetings. But at least keep the membership meeting what it always should have been, which is the members' opportunity for that annual engagement. All right, let's talk about unanimous written consent. I lost my roll one line at a time per click, but we'll go through this. So what is unanimous written consent? There has been a lot of criticism of this statute. This is a statute in the Arizona Nonprofit Corporation Statute, Nonprofit Corporation Act, and the unanimous written consent statute says that if all of the directors sign, then the board can take action without a board meeting. So subsection A says, skip that first part, go to the bold. If the action is taken by all of the directors, action can be taken. I'm sorry, let me start at the beginning. Unless the articles or bylaws provide otherwise, action required or permitted by the Nonprofit Act to be taken at a director's meeting may be taken without a meeting if the action is taken by all of the directors. This is not on a board of 5, a 3-2 vote. On a board of 5, this is not 4-1. On a board of 5, this is all 5. This is 5-0. The action must be evidenced by one or more written consents describing the action taken, signed by each of the 5 directors, and included in the minutes filed with the corporate records reflecting the action taken. Minutes of the October meeting, minutes of the November meeting, minutes of the December meeting, unanimous written consent, minutes of the January meeting. We're filing these all sequentially. Minutes of the monthly meeting, unanimous written consent, minutes of the next meeting, everything's being done sequentially. Subsection B, action taken under this statute is effective when the last director signs the consent, unless the consent specifies a different effective date. The consent signed under this section has the effect of a meeting vote and may be described as such in any document. A director can revoke their consent. And then subsection E For purposes of this section, a consent may be signed using electronic signature. And then I put DocuSign, Adobe e-signature, etc. So this has been transformative in at least one discrete context. Associations under developer control. The association under developer control, let's create a hypothetical, wants to change landscape vendors. The decision is made to fire ABC Landscaping and they want to hire DEF Landscaping. The professional community manager creates a unanimous written consent. Number one, fire ABC. Number two, hire DEF. There are 3 developer affiliated people on the board. There's 3 signature blocks. It's created for 3 signatures sent to email through DocuSign, a slick cloud-based application that creates digital signatures. Perhaps you've used it. It's sent to the 3 developer directors, goes to their email, they sign on their iPhone, no matter where they are in the world. It's done within minutes. That action is completed, the board has acted, and there was no meeting. There was no notice of a meeting. Now, remember, under developer control, we don't have the debate necessarily about homeowners attending the meeting because there's an exception for that under the open meeting statute. But it occurred. The meeting didn't have to we have to worry about it. So the action occurred by written consent. So we end up with no meeting. So what my point is that this is used often in that discrete circumstance, communities under developer control. Now, here's the challenge. There's no limitation in the statute. Hey, this can only be used under developer control. Because of that, the legislature has attempted to revise and amend unanimous written consent because after the move to homeowner control, it can subvert the open meeting requirement. Because as you can see, after moving to homeowner control, a homeowner controlled board could fire ABC Landscaping and hire DEF Landscaping also. There's nothing in this statute, and I've reproduced the entirety of the statute here. I didn't delete any words. I copied and pasted the entirety of ARS section 10-3821 on this screen. No words are missed. Every word from the statute is on this PowerPoint slide. It's a nonprofit statute. If the association you manage or are on the board of is a nonprofit corporation, this statute applies. There's nothing here that says if you're a nonprofit and a community association in Arizona, a condo or planned community, there's nothing here that says if you're a condo or planned community after turnover to homeowner control, you can't use this. There's nothing here that says that. Now, the legislature has had a number of legislators that have introduced legislation to do that. Because after the turnover to homeowner control, a board could use unanimous written consent to avoid discussing the landscaping situation in front of the homeowners. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it's obvious. It's plainly obvious that the board could use this statute to avoid discussing, in my hypothetical, the landscaping situation in front of the homeowners. And let's think about this from our own experience. In a homeowner controlled association, by the time that ABC landscaping situation gets to a vote in front of the board, and there are two pieces to the landscaping situation as I've created it over the last 3 to 4 minutes. The two pieces are whether to fire ABC, that's piece number one. And piece number two is whether to hire DEF landscaping. By the time it comes to a vote, the question of whether to fire ABC, and let's assume a 5-person board, homeowner controlled board. Most of the time, the question of whether to fire ABC is going to be a 5-0 vote. And we can also agree, everyone on this webinar, that when it comes right down to it, there's not a lot of dissension on board votes when it comes right down to it. When we really think about it, board members prefer to be unanimous. It's really their preference. When somebody on the board comes out with a strong position, I move that we fire ABC Landscaping, and someone seconds it. And then there's discussion. And then there's discussion from the audience, which we've already discussed is required. When people start to pile on that ABC is doing a bad job, led by that one director who made the motion and the second one who seconded the motion. And then people in the audience started to pile on, yeah, they're doing a bad job. Yeah, there's weeds everywhere. Yeah, the granite's a mess. The trees haven't been trimmed. By the time that's all done, the gravity to make that vote unanimous is strong. That's going to be a 5-0 vote. We know it. Inevitably, that's going to be a 5-0 vote. So how hard would it be for that to have been a unanimous written consent even before the meeting? Not hard. It would not have been hard. Now, hiring DEF, that's a trickier question as a hypothetical. For that to be a unanimous written consent, there will be at least one director who says, well, we got 3 bids. I like DEF, but there was XYZ also. And there was that other company. I'm not prepared to do a unanimous written consent on DEF. Firing is easier by unanimous written consent than hiring. So the legislature has attempted to revise and amend unanimous written consent because it can undermine open meetings. What the legislature wants is for boards to meet in person in an open environment where homeowners can watch and participate. That we know. So let's talk about Zoom and Microsoft Teams and other software solutions that took hold in the pandemic and whether that's legal. What does the law say about that? And can we keep doing it? Of course we can keep doing it. We're doing it. People do it all the time. And, you know, in my career, I've gone to so many evening meetings. I've had weeks where I've had 2 or 3 a night as a lawyer. Hey, come to the meeting. And, you know, really grew up, my kids grew up with that. And now it's maybe twice a week on Zoom, which I like. Try not to do it from my house too much. The dogs and everything else getting in the way. But let's talk about the statute. Why are we comfortable doing this? Well, let's go back to the Nonprofit Corporation Act, ARS 10-3820, subsection C. Copied and pasted all the words from the statute, unless the articles or bylaws provide otherwise, and they almost never do say something contrary to this. The Board of Directors may permit any or all directors to participate in a regular or special board meeting by or conduct the meeting through the use of any means of communication by which all directors participating may simultaneously hear each other during the meeting. A director participating in a meeting by this method is deemed to be present in person at the meeting. This statute hasn't been touched since 1999. I think the idea here was a speakerphone, and we did this back in the late 90s and early 2000s. But on Zoom, we can certainly hear each other. The fact that we can also see each other if our cameras are turned on, which we prefer, of course. I don't love Zoom when people don't have their cameras on. We like to see each other, even though in this webinar format, I'm the only one with my camera on. I can't see you all. And so we have this statute that we rely on for doing board meetings by Zoom. Now, under the statute we've already covered, we still have to allow people to speak during the meeting after an agenda item has been discussed by the board and before the board takes action. In the Condominium Act and the Planned Community Statute, by the way, I'm quoting the Planned Community Statute, the language in the Condominium Act is identical. It says, all meetings of the association and the board and any regularly scheduled committee meetings are open to all members of the association. And as we've covered already, any person designated by a member in writing as their representative, and all members so desiring shall be allowed to attend and speak at an appropriate time during the deliberations and proceedings. Now, as it turns out, Zoom licenses, there's some expense involved for some of our largest associations. There's a new community in Buckeye called Teravalis, projected a build out to have 100,000 homes and potentially 300,000 residents. They're going to do their meetings on Zoom, which I don't know anything about. I mean, how big it's going to be a build out and how many people would actually dial in, is to be determined. It's going to take, at last I heard, the build out might take 50 years. And, to project how many people would dial in on Zoom to a board meeting is incredibly speculative at best. So we have no idea how a community of that size, which would clearly be the largest in Arizona history from a community association standpoint, and what Zoom will cost by then, who knows? But that'd be a pretty big Zoom meeting, and I'm not sure, it'd be pretty unwieldy. You probably need a couple of tech experts just monitoring to try to get people's raised hands and try to get the questions for an agenda item. And the statutes might be different by then, but some associations are already big enough that doing the meetings virtually could be a bit unwieldy. So we're confident that these virtual meetings are legal. And when you combine these two statutory requirements, 10-3820C says all board members have to be able to hear each other simultaneously during the meeting, hear each other, see each other. Okay, no problem. Zoom works within the regulatory scheme of how the board members interact with each other during the meeting, no problem. And then 33-1804A and the companion condominium statute, which is identical, says the owners have to be allowed to attend and speak during the meeting. We covered all of that. And so what we end up with, when you take all of this together, I believe the average board meeting, and again, membership meetings are fast because we're doing the election before and accumulating all of that before the meeting. And I believe that annual meetings are about member engagement and reporting and bragging about how presidents, treasurers, and management have done good things for the community over the previous year. If it takes 2 hours, it takes 2 hours, but that's member engagement. So the annual meeting isn't long because we're conducting an election with nominations from the floor and speeches. That's offline from the gathering. So board meetings, we're engaging with owners, speaking before action is taken. A good board chair is managing that efficiently, hopefully, and if desired, taking advantage of virtual meetings legal under Arizona statute for the reasons set forth here. And one final note before I take questions, we're doing that virtually here through chat or raised hands, or you got to type your question, unfortunately. The final thought, I got distracted. Distracted myself. It doesn't have to be a myth, I guess was my final thought. If you want to have a meeting that lasts an hour or less, it can be done if that's what you want. But again, as I started, it's aspirational. But if you want to have a meeting that moves along, you can do it. But it's up to you. All right, I did see a raised hand earlier, but here it is. Okay. The question was, is this only for Arizona or New Mexico as well? Quick disclaimer, I'm not licensed to practice in New Mexico. The mandatory components under New Mexico statute, I believe, are different, but this is an Arizona specific presentation. And so unfortunately, that's the best I can do. Any other questions? Happy to help if I can. Well, thank you for attending this first seminar in 2025. Hope this has been helpful and look forward to your continued participation here at the Carpenter Law Firm. We're dedicated to helping and doing legal work for Arizona's community associations all across the state. If you ever need any help, please feel free to reach out here at the firm. Thanks.